Welcome to Infidelity Tales. If you're new, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. It only takes a second, but it gives us motivation to create more stories, so please subscribe to this video. And now let's start the story. I never thought I would share my heart with the world, but life has a way of taking us to places we never imagined. My name is Ria. For the longest time, I believed I had a perfect marriage. My husband, Samir, was kind and hardworking. He was dedicated to our family. We had been married for almost 10 years. Things were no longer as passionate as they once were, but I still loved him deeply. Yet, something inside me had begun to change. Maybe it was the endless routine, maybe the exhaustion of balancing work and home, or maybe just life moving on. I felt an emptiness growing inside me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself all marriages go through phases. One day, I decided to join a gym. I just wanted more energy and better health. Samir supported me completely and even helped me choose a gym nearby. That's where I met Aaron. He was the head trainer. From the first moment, I saw something different in him. He wasn't just doing his job, he cared. When I nervously stepped into the gym for the first time, Aaron smiled and said, "You don't have to be perfect on day one. It's about progress, not perfection." His words stayed with me. It had been so long since someone had spoken to me with such warmth. Samir and I had fallen into a rhythm of small talk and routines. But here was someone who made me feel seen. At first, my interactions with Aaron were purely professional. He guided my workouts and encouraged me when I wanted to give up. But slowly, our conversations grew longer. I learned he had been a national-level athlete before an injury ended his career. He spoke of the pain of starting over and finding a new purpose. I understood that. I too felt like I had lost a part of myself over the years, the girl who once dreamed big, laughed freely, and felt alive. One evening after a tough session, we sat outside the gym. He said, "You seem different today." I hesitated before admitting, "Sometimes I feel stuck. Like I'm living the same day over and over again." He nodded. "Routine can do that. But you're making changes, Ria. That's the first step." It wasn't just fitness anymore, it was about finding myself again. Over time, I felt lighter. I smiled more. And Aaron was at the heart of this change. I told myself it was harmless, he was just a friend, but deep down, I knew it was more. One rainy evening, the gym was almost empty. The power went out for a moment. It was just us, standing there in the dim light, listening to the rain. He started to say something, but I whispered, "I know." We stood in silence, both knowing we were at a crossroads. In the days after, I felt torn, between guilt and excitement, fear and longing. I told myself nothing had happened, but I knew the truth. I had crossed an emotional line. When Samir said he'd be away for a weekend, I went to the gym as usual. After my session, Aaron suggested we go for a walk. It was a cool evening, the sky painted in orange and pink. "I feel like I'm losing myself," I admitted. "You're not lost," he said softly. "You're searching for something you've been missing." "But what if what I'm searching for is wrong?" He looked into my eyes. "Is it wrong to want to be happy?" We sat on a bench, talking about dreams, regrets, and the things we had both let go of. There were no expectations, only understanding. He put his jacket over my shoulders when I shivered, and it warmed me in ways that had nothing to do with the fabric. "I don't want to make things complicated for you," he said. That night, I went home feeling more conflicted than ever. I couldn't deny it, he made me feel alive. On the last day before Samir's return, Aaron asked me, "Are you happy, Ria?" I didn't know how to answer. And maybe that was the problem all along. When Samir came home, we talked. For the first time in years, I asked him, "Do you think we're happy?" He hesitated, saying marriage changes over time. But I pressed, "Are we happy?" That's when I realized we lived in two different worlds. To him, our life was fine. To me, something was missing. I didn't tell him about Aaron, that wasn't the point. The point was, I had changed. I couldn't keep pretending. I think we need to figure out what we want, I told him, because I don't want to wake up 10 years from now as two people just sharing a house instead of a life. I saw something in his eyes then, fear, sadness, maybe even regret. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. In the days that followed, we tried again. We talked more. We went for walks. We cooked together. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. As for Aaron, I made my choice. I went to the gym one last time. I can't do this, I told him. I know, he said, smiling gently. You made me realize things I'd been ignoring for years, I admitted. But I need to figure out my life first. You deserve to be happy, Rhea, he said. And for the first time, I believed it. I walked away that day choosing not Samir, not Aaron, but myself. Because happiness isn't about who you're with. It's about finding peace within yourself. My story isn't about an affair. It's about waking up and realizing life is too short to live on autopilot. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't leaving, it's staying and fighting for what truly matters. Choosing myself wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 little choices I had to make every day. In the weeks after my talk with Aaron, I found myself looking at life differently. The mornings felt quieter. My tea tasted warmer. And every time I caught my own reflection in the mirror, I wondered if I could learn to truly like the woman staring back. Samir noticed the changes in me, though he didn't always know what they meant. Some days he tried harder, offering to help in the kitchen, asking me how my day had been. Other days, he seemed unsure, as if he was afraid that any wrong word would push me further away. We began spending evenings on the balcony. No phones. No television. Just us and the slow fade of daylight. At first, our conversations were awkward, full of long pauses. But slowly, we started talking, not about bills or chores, but about life. I told him about how I missed painting, how I missed long drives with music filling the air. He told me he missed the way I used to laugh without covering my mouth. One Saturday, he surprised me. I thought maybe we could go for a drive, he said, holding the car keys like a shy child offering a gift. We drove out of the city, windows down, letting the wind mess our hair. It wasn't perfect. We didn't suddenly fall into some fairy tale romance. But for the first time in years, I felt we were both trying. Life has a strange way of teaching you what matters. I began noticing the details I used to miss, an old couple holding hands in the park, a mother braiding her daughter's hair on the bus, the way the air smelled after rain. I also started spending time alone. I took long walks without my phone, sat in cafes with a book, and sometimes just watched the world go by. At first, the silence was uncomfortable. But slowly, I began to crave it. I thought about Aaron sometimes, not with longing, but with gratitude. He had been the mirror that showed me my own emptiness. He had reminded me of my own worth. Some people come into your life to stay, and others arrive only to help you turn a page. Both matter. Samir and I started therapy together. The first session was hard. We sat across from a stranger and were asked to share the parts of our hearts we'd hidden for years. There were tears. There were moments when one of us would look away because the truth was too raw. But there were also moments of relief, moments when I could see that, beneath the years of routine, Samir still cared. It wasn't just about love anymore, it was about rebuilding trust, presence, and friendship. One evening, after Samir had gone to bed, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter, not to him, not to Aaron, but to myself. Dear Rhea. You are not defined by the moments you got lost. You are defined by the courage it took to find yourself again. You have walked through confusion and temptation, through silence and longing, and yet, you are still here. Keep choosing yourself. Keep building the life you deserve. The rest will follow. I folded the letter and placed it in my journal. It wasn't a goodbye to the past, it was a promise to my future. Months have passed. Samir and I are still working on us. Some days are good. Some days are fragile. But I no longer live on autopilot. I wake up and choose to be present. I choose to talk. I choose to listen. I choose to notice the way sunlight spills into our kitchen in the morning, or how the air cools just before night falls. And maybe that's what life is, choosing again and again, even when it's hard. Because in the end, relationships aren't only about holding on to someone else. They're also about holding on to yourself. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. The kind of day you never expect to remember. I was leaving work when my phone rang. Samir's number flashed on the screen, but when I answered, it wasn't his voice, it was a stranger's. "This is the emergency ward. Your husband's been in an accident." The world around me seemed to blur. My hand shook as I drove to the hospital. Every thought I'd ever had about our marriage, our struggles, our distance, they all vanished, replaced by one desperate prayer: please let him live. When I saw him, pale and unconscious, something inside me broke. All the quiet resentments, all the unanswered questions, they didn't matter anymore. All I could think about was how much I still loved him, even through the cracks. Samir's injuries weren't life-threatening, but they kept him in the hospital for weeks. I stayed by his side every day, feeding him, reading to him, holding his hand while he slept. One night, he woke up and looked at me for a long time. "You stayed," he whispered. "Of course I stayed," I said, my voice trembling. We didn't talk about the accident after that, not in detail. But something shifted between us. He began to open up more, to tell me about his fears, his exhaustion, and how he had taken my presence for granted. I told him the truth too, not all of it, but enough. I told him about the loneliness, the way I had felt invisible, the way I had started to lose myself. He listened without turning away. When Samir came home, everything felt slower. We moved through our days with more intention. Breakfast became a shared ritual. We took short walks in the evening, his hand finding mine almost without thought. We still had disagreements. There were still shadows from the past. But now, there was also a softness, a reminder that nothing in life is promised, and that love needs to be cared for like something fragile and alive. One afternoon, months later, I saw Aaron at the supermarket. For a moment, we both froze. Then he smiled. "You look different," he said gently. "I feel different," I replied. And it was true. The ache that used to pull me toward him was gone. What remained was gratitude. We didn't linger. Some people belong to certain chapters of your life, and when that chapter ends, you let it rest. Now, I understand that life isn't about never getting lost, it's about finding the courage to return to yourself. Relationships are not fixed, they breathe, they weaken, they heal. Samir and I are still learning how to love each other in the present, not in the past. We are still learning how to choose one another, even when it's hard. And I am still learning how to choose myself, not in a selfish way, but in a way that allows me to show up whole in every part of my life. Because love is not about never doubting. Love is about staying when it matters most. Time has a way of softening sharp edges. The wounds in our marriage hadn't disappeared, but they had turned into scars, reminders of what we'd been through, not open pains. Samir and I had learned to talk, to listen, to pause before speaking in anger. We still stumbled, but we no longer let silence grow like weeds between us. We had also found small joys again, Saturday morning markets, making tea together before the sun rose, walking in the rain without umbrellas. They weren't grand gestures, but they were seeds of connection, planted daily. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Samir came home looking troubled. "I have to tell you something," he said, sitting across from me. His company had offered him a major promotion, but it meant moving to another city, far from everything familiar. Old fears rose in me instantly, the thought of losing the life we had rebuilt, the worry that distance from our roots might bring back the loneliness we had fought so hard to escape. I took a deep breath. "If we go together. But we can't lose us again. Not for any job." He nodded, relief softening his expression. That's what I was afraid of too. The move. The new city was bigger, louder, and full of strangers. At first, I felt invisible again. But I had learned from the past, I didn't wait for life to happen to me. I joined a community art group, began volunteering at a children's reading program, and even signed up for a weekend photography class. Samir, seeing my efforts, made his own. He refused to let his work consume every hour. Some evenings, he'd come home and say, "Let's go explore," and we'd walk down streets we'd never seen before, trying little cafes and talking about everything from dreams to regrets. One evening, at a charity event for the reading program, I met a young woman named Maya. She reminded me of myself from years ago, full of quiet sadness she couldn't name. She told me about her relationship, how it felt empty, how she was searching for meaning. For a moment, I saw myself sitting across from Aaron years ago, hearing words that woke me up. And I realized, this was my turn to pass that gift forward. You have to choose yourself first, I told her softly. Not in a way that hurts others without reason, but in a way that keeps your soul alive. Because you can't pour into a relationship from an empty heart. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Thank you. I needed to hear that. That night, walking home with Samir, I told him about Maya. He listened quietly, then squeezed my hand. You've changed so much, Ria. You're lighter somehow. I had to learn the hard way, I said, smiling faintly. But maybe that's the only way we really learn. We didn't speak for a while after that. The city lights blurred in the distance, and I realized something, life had brought me full circle. I had gone from the woman searching for herself to the woman who. Years later, I would sit by the window of our little apartment, looking out over the city skyline, and think about all the versions of me that had existed. The girl who felt unseen. The woman who almost lost herself to longing. The wife who chose to fight for her marriage instead of running away. The friend who could finally offer wisdom instead of only seeking it. Samir was reading on the couch that evening, his glasses slipping down his nose, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The man who once buried himself in work now stopped in the middle of a paragraph just to look up and say, "You okay?" I had once thought love was fire, bright, consuming, unstoppable. But real love, the kind that survives storms, is more like a steady flame. It doesn't burn you, it warms you. Sometimes I wondered what my life would have been if I'd taken a different path, if I'd left, if I'd chosen someone else, if I had never returned to Samir. But life doesn't give you rewinds, only moments. And this moment, sitting here with him, was worth all the ones that had come before. One day, Maya wrote to me. I took your advice, her message read. I chose myself. And now I'm choosing a relationship that feels like home. I smiled at my phone for a long time. Maybe we never really know how far our words and actions travel. Maybe love isn't just what we give to the person beside us, it's what spills out into the world, touching lives we'll never fully know. I closed the curtain, turned off the lamp, and joined Samir on the couch. He took my hand without looking away from his book. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of all our years, the fights, the silences, the rebuilding, the laughter. This was love's quiet triumph, not the grand declarations, but the choice, again and again, to stay, to grow, and to believe in each other. A year after Maya's message, life gave me another shift. My father fell ill back in our hometown. The news came on a rainy Tuesday morning, the kind where the clouds seemed to carry their own grief. Samir and I traveled back together. The small town felt like it had been waiting for me, familiar streets, the same old bakery smell in the air, neighbors who still remembered my childhood. Seeing my father lying in bed, thinner than I remembered, pulled something deep in me. We had never been a family that said I love you easily, but as I held his hand, I realized how many years I had spent chasing connection in romantic relationships while letting some family bonds quietly fade. For weeks, I stayed by his side, reading to him, cooking meals he barely touched, listening to stories he'd never told me before. Samir visited every weekend, never complaining about the long train rides, always showing up with flowers or books. It struck me then, love is not always about grand romance, Sometimes it's about who stands with you in the hardest rooms, the ones that smell of medicine and memories. When my father passed, I expected to feel only sadness. But there was also peace. We had said what needed to be said. I had been present. And maybe that's the only real closure we get in life, the comfort of knowing we showed up when it mattered. The weeks after the funeral were quiet. Samir and I would sit on the balcony at night, watching the stars. One evening, he turned to me and said, "You've been strong through all of this. Stronger than I've ever seen you." I didn't feel strong. But I had learned that strength isn't about not breaking, it's about breaking, and still choosing to move forward. Months later, Maya came to visit. She was glowing in a way I hadn't seen before. We spent hours talking, about her new partner, her dreams, her fears. Listening to her was like hearing an echo of my own journey, only this time I was the steady one. When she left, I realized something. Life isn't just about collecting experiences for yourself. It's also about becoming part of someone else's turning point. One quiet Sunday, I wrote a letter to my younger self. You will go through love that burns and love that heals. You will lose people you thought would be with you forever. You will see yourself in strangers and find home in unexpected places. You will forgive things you thought you never could. And through it all, you will not just survive, you will become someone you're proud to be. I tucked the letter into a book on the shelf. Maybe one day, years from now, I'd find it again and smile at the woman who wrote it. Time moved quietly after my father's passing. Seasons came and went, yet life felt softer somehow, like the edges of pain had been worn down. Samir and I grew closer in ways that were not loud or dramatic. It was in the little things, how he made tea the way I liked without asking, how I remembered to keep his glasses in the same place so he wouldn't lose them. We had once almost fallen apart, but now we held each other in the small daily moments that no one else could see. One evening, as we walked home from the market, he stopped and looked at me under the yellow street light. "You've changed," he said. "In a bad way?" I asked, half smiling. "In the best way," he whispered. Maya came back into town one summer. She was different, happier, lighter. She brought her partner with her, and I could see the gentle way he held her hand, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Later that night, when Maya and I sat on the balcony with cups of warm tea, she said, "You taught me to wait for love that feels safe. I didn't know it could be like this." Her words stayed with me long after she left. I realized that the pain I had gone through, the lessons I had learned, had not only healed me, they had become a lantern for someone else's path. That winter, we lost Mrs. D'Souza, the elderly neighbor who had always left homemade pickles at our door. She had been part of my life for years, a quiet presence who never asked for much but gave generously. At her funeral, I thought about how many people leave this world without their names in history books, but with hearts they've touched in countless ways. And I promised myself that my life, too, would be measured not in grand achievements, but in the kindness I leave behind. One rainy evening, I sat at my desk and wrote another letter. This one was not for my younger self, but for the woman I would be many years from now. I hope you still find joy in small things, a ripe mango, the smell of rain, the sound of someone you love laughing. I hope you are still patient, still gentle, even when life tests you. And I hope you know that every version of you was doing her best with what she knew. I sealed the letter and placed it in a box where I kept precious things, photos, old postcards, and memories that still had weight. The years began to gather quietly, like pages in a book I didn't notice I was writing. Samir's hair turned silver, and mine followed soon after. We laughed about it sometimes, saying we were turning into an old black and white photograph. Life slowed down, but in the best way. We no longer hurried through mornings. We drank tea without checking the clock. Our conversations were less about plans and more about memories, like rereading a beloved novel together. Some evenings, Samir would tell me, "Do you remember our first fight? I thought we wouldn't last a month." And I would smile and answer, "And yet, here we are, lasting through decades." One autumn, I fell ill. Nothing too serious, but enough to keep me in bed for days. Samir cooked soup, stayed beside me, and read my favorite book aloud in his calm, steady voice. I realized then, love is not always in the storms or the grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the way someone puts a blanket over you without being asked. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I felt his hand resting gently over mine. It was the kind of touch that said, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Years later, Maya called me one afternoon, her voice full of both joy and nerves. She told me she was pregnant. I couldn't stop smiling. When her baby was born, I visited her. Holding that tiny life in my arms, I thought about how time moves in circles. Once, Maya had looked to me for comfort in her darkest days. Now, I was here for the brightest day of her life. One evening, long after the house had gone silent, Samir and I sat together on the balcony. The night air was cool, and the stars were scattered like someone had shaken a jar of light. He said softly, we've had our share of storms. Yes, I replied, but we learned how to hold on through them. There was no need to say more. We both knew that every pain, every goodbye, every lesson had brought us to this stillness, a peace that could not be rushed or faked. The years began to feel softer, like pages worn thin from being turned too many times. My steps slowed, and Samir's hands trembled when he held his tea. We laughed about it, saying our bodies were simply reminding us to live gently. One spring morning, Samir didn't wake up. He looked peaceful, like he had only closed his eyes for a nap. My hand shook as I touched his face, still warm, still him, but already slipping into memory. The days after were quiet in a way that felt heavy. I kept hearing his voice in small places, the kitchen, the garden, the balcony. Sometimes I answered aloud, as if he were still there. A month later, while tidying his desk, I found an envelope with my name on it. Inside was his handwriting, familiar and steady. Ria, if you're reading this, I want you to know that every day with you was my favorite. You gave me peace, even when the world was noisy. You taught me that love is not in the first hello, but in the 1,000 mornings after. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried until the paper felt damp in my hands. I began spending more time in the garden. Samir had planted roses there years ago, saying, they'll bloom for us every spring. The first spring without him, they bloomed brighter than ever. Sometimes I sat among them, closing my eyes and letting the wind carry the scent. I imagined he was near, watching me in that quiet, steady way he always had. As the years went on, my hair turned white, my hands thin. Maya's children visited often, filling the house with laughter. They would ask about their grandfather Samir, and I would tell them stories, not just of what he did, but of how he loved. When my time finally came, I hoped it would be like his, gentle, quiet, surrounded by the echoes of a life well lived. Because in the end, it wasn't the years that mattered. It was the mornings of shared tea. The silent walks home. The hands held through storms. And the simple truth that we had loved each other fully, without running out of anything to give. I still remember the day I lost Ria. The house was quiet when I arrived, sunlight spilling across the living room like a gentle blessing. She was in her favorite chair by the window, a blanket over her knees, her head tilted slightly to one side. It looked as if she had only fallen asleep. Her hands were resting on a folded letter. I knew instantly who it was from. Samir's handwriting, bold, steady, timeless. It felt like he had been waiting for her, and now they had gone to meet each other somewhere beyond my sight. As we went through her things, I found a box under her bed. Inside were old photographs, Ria and Samir on their wedding day, laughing in the kitchen, holding me as a child. There were notes they had written to each other, small, everyday words that somehow carried a lifetime of meaning. One said, "Don't forget to drink water. I love you." Another said, "Your smile makes the day softer." I realized then that love isn't always the big gestures. Sometimes it's in remembering the little things, over and over, until they become the fabric of a life. Every spring, I visit their garden. The roses Samir planted still bloom, almost defiantly, as if to say love doesn't end, it simply changes shape. My children run through the rows of flowers, their laughter echoing the happiness I once felt in that same garden. I tell them, your grandparents loved each other in a way that made everything around them grow. And I mean it, not just the flowers, but the people, the moments, the very air they lived in. There are days I miss them so deeply it feels like my chest might break. But then I remember how they lived, slow, patient, choosing kindness again and again. I try to love my husband the way they loved each other, not perfectly, but faithfully. I try to be present for my children the way Ria was for me, even when her own heart was heavy. I know that one day, when my own time comes, I'll see them again. And we'll sit together in that garden, with no more goodbyes, only the soft sound of roses swaying in the wind. Because love like theirs doesn't fade, it waits. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to share and like this video to your friends and leave a comment below. Have you ever faced challenges in your relationships? How did you handle them? We'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss and upload. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring you more powerful stories. Thanks for watching.